like to go through these things kind of in front of the class. That way you get a little bit more understanding of them, because it's one thing to read it on a piece of paper, but then it's another thing to actually be able to see what they do. Some of these I'll spend a little bit more time on. Some of these we'll just kind of breeze through. And some of these I'll kind of bounce around. So I'm going to skip the aim constraint for a second. I'll come back to that one. So the first one is Animatic. This is a rough animation used in the planning and storyboard camera moves and movements on the screen. Animatic. I never remember the name of that company, whatever it is. But this is an Animatic. So it's not a full-blown animation, it's just a rough idea of what the animation is going to look like. Very simple pieces of geometry, not too concerned with the lighting, not too concerned with the whole animation of the scene, just kind of roughing out different spots and what's happening. They'll do these for obviously 3D things. Here's one from Iron Man 3. So this is a mix of, looks like 2D and 3D. But the idea with it is that the directors, the actors, the cameramen, the lighting people, the environment people, they all get an idea of what's going to be happening in the scene, so each one that has their job can figure out what it is they need to do. If there's something going to be digital, then they can figure out this is how the digital stuff works. And like I said, these are done pretty much for every movie, definitely any Marvel movie you see. They're doing this, plus they're doing a 3D animatic, plus they're doing storyboards. And this is a lower quality one. Typically you would see like a pretty much game engine realistic looking thing for their 3D stuff. Watch it all day long. So that's what an animatic is. I'm going to skip anticipation. I'm going to skip appeal. I'm going to skip arc. We'll come back to those. Auto key is the way that Maya doesn't set keys, but we can have it set keys. If you've used After Effects before, After Effects uses an auto key feature. So when we go here, then I set a key, and then I scoot up a little bit, and I set a key. That automatically set, or didn't automatically set a key. I had to set those keys. If I turn on the auto key feature, which is right here, then as I go into the middle and I adjust a setting, it'll automatically set a key for this. This can be dangerous in Maya, which is typically why we don't do it. It's a lot easier for us to accidentally move something ever so slightly and then accidentally set a key for it when we may not mean to do that. Okay, so typically we don't turn auto key on, but that is a feature you could use if you were so inclined. Baking is a way to convert an animation so that it's locked in, so there's no interpolation to it. So we've adjusted things in the graph editor, so maybe they go slower, faster, whatever. This item here, beautiful. Let's say I'm taking this to another engine. I may be taking this into Unreal. I may be taking it to RealFlow. Somewhere else, I'm taking it out of Maya, and I'm going to use it for something. And what I have to do is lock in my keyframes, because the other software may not interpret the same way that this one does. So if I'm going to delete all these other keyframes because they don't do anything. If I grab my translates here, and I go to modify, edit keys, bake simulation, what this is going to do is it's going to take these keyframes and it's going to follow the motion every single frame and put a keyframe for every single one of those. Okay? So if I grab these, I say bake it from channel box and hit bake, you'll see that down here I have a keyframe for every frame. That way when I take it out, there's no guessing. The software doesn't have to guess what the animation's doing. Now this might seem trivial, but if you do like something inside Maya where you're like, I want it to go super duper slow and then boom, speed up, and you did a lot of that in the graph editor, when you take that into the other software, it's going to see keyframe, keyframe, and do its own interpolation between them. And basically all the graph editor stuff you did for tweaking will be gone, okay? So we bake it so it doesn't do that. Now another use for baking is, let's say I have a cube, and I'm going to go into here. I don't know if this will work. We'll find out. It didn't work, so I'll just go the other way. dy equals rand. All right, so I just wrote an expression, which you'll see down further in the list. This expression, if you've used After Effects before, allows us to basically write a little formula. The formula will then control the motion of this item. Instead of me having to go through and set keyframes for it, that will automatically animate it. When we get into rigging, which will be in a couple weeks, this will be very critical. So this is going to randomize the translate Y between 0 and 10. Now when I hit play, okay, so every frame it's picking a new value between 0 and 10. Not terribly useful in this case, but let's say that I wanted to bake this. Instead of baking every frame, I'm going to bake every 10 frames. And so now I get this. And so if I just wanted something to just kind of like moving in the background or floating or wobbling, very quickly I can do that, okay? So a lot of times I'll use baking for that if I'm just staying in Maya 2. Blocking is where we are blocking out an animation before we actually set it up to do the final animation. When you were looking at these Iron Man 3 frames, you'll see a lot of these frames, it's just like he's in a pose here, he's in a pose there, he's in a pose there. That's blocking out his motion so that when you are satisfied with how everything is timed out, you can go back in and start smoothing things out. Horton, this guy here does a really nice job where he shows, here is my reference, here's my blocking phase, and then here's the actual animation. So here's him actually acting out the scene. Here is a blocking phase, this is a refining stage, and then this is the actual movie. So you can see how rough the animation is in that first stage. A lot of animators, when they're setting things up, they may have a senior animator at the company. He may do the blocking phase to make sure everything is blocked out accordingly, and then he passes it off to a junior animator to go ahead and put all the other in-between keyframes in there, and then it would go back to the master animator to verify everything is cool and then tweak where he needs to tweak. But obviously this stage is crucial. If this stage isn't set up right, there's no way you can go to that stage and fix it, okay? So a lot of times we'll do a blocking animation. When we're doing our stick, we're setting a block here, and then we're coming over and setting another one and another one. So we're just blocking out where that's going to happen. Blend shapes are ways that we can deform stuff. So here's my cube. Let's say that I had another cube. Oops, sorry. They changed how they do it, so I don't actually need the other cube. I'm going to go to rigging. I'm going to go to deform. I'm going to go to blend shapes. And then I'm going to go to the blend shape editor. There we go. There we go. Okay, So create blend shape, distorted, and I'm going to say snack key. Oh, add target. There we go. So now I'm going to take this and just kind of distort this. Gorgeous. And now I have a slider that will take me from the previous one to the new one. Now, not a whole lot of use for something like this, but if you take this and you add it to a character's face, you can create all the different expressions of a face. So every time they would smile, you could have a slider for smile, and then put the face where it should look like if it's smiling. If the right eyebrow is raised, you would have another slider for right eyebrow raised. Every expression that they would have, you can have that kind of thing set up. All of these are using blend shapes using other controllers. When we get to rigging, you really see, when we get to animating characters, you'll see that. A breakdown is a way to add two keyframes between two keys between two major keyframes, and it creates a relationship. So if you move one, it'll move the other one. Not a whole lot of times we're going to use that because there's other ways to do it. So you just remember that one. Character set. All right, let's close that for a second. Let's go and open up our animated stick. Oops, that's nothing. All right, so we have the animated stick here going incredibly slow. Oh, I was adding fluids to it. That's why it's going super slow. Yep, I'll just delete those. We don't need that. There you go. Okay, so inside here we have certain things that we're animating, and it's pretty limited. So there's not a huge need for a character set in here. But essentially what a character set allows me to do is grab all the stuff that's going to be animated, and down here is where I would set which one I'm working on. But I can create a character set. And inside here, it will actually store all the items I just selected, and like these are the ones that I would animate. So this is very helpful for when you're doing a character. You can separate like the lower body, the upper body, and the head into 3 different areas. So as you're focusing on the lower body and how the legs are moving, you just set keyframes on those. When you're focused on the upper body, you can just set keyframes on those. When you're focused on the head, you just set keyframes on those. Now, the advantage of that is without having anything selected at all, if I hit S, it'll set keyframes on anything that's inside of that character set. So when I am working on the lower body, I can put the legs exactly where I want them, hit S, and it'll set keyframes on 20 different objects. And they all get their keyframes where they need them. Then when I do the upper body, same thing. I switch to upper body, put the arms where I need them, hit S, and then it sets keyframes on everything. Okay? So it's an easy way for us to be able to animate a character using that. And you can have, if you have 20 characters, you can have 20 different character sets inside there. Control curves are the curves we use when we're animating or adjusting the graph editor, right? We adjust those curves and handlebars. Again, we'll get back to constraints, so you can see that later. Deformers are just different ways that we can tweak different shapes. There's a list of them. Cylinder, sure. And lots of divisions. So under deform, all of these are different deformers, okay? There's some in here that you would typically use more than others. So inside here, there's nonlinear deformers. These are typically the ones that we would use. I've used all of them, or most of them at least. It all depends on the situation, okay? So one of them is bend. And this one allows me to bend. Okay? And then this could be animated too. So if I put this at the bottom of this, and I make this bigger, and I go like that, then I can animate this thing kind of going side to side like that. Or if I go under Nonlinear and I go to twist, there we go. Then I can twist this. I'm going to make less divisions in the cylinder just so it's more obvious. That way and that way. There we go. Okay, you can use these as modeling tools. You could also use them as animation tools. If I'm animating something that's very cartoony, it bounces and squashes and moves around and twists, I could add these on top of it to create that kind of illusion. Okay, for all of them, you just select the geometry, you go to that tool, and then you add it to it. So here's squash. I'm going to put him at the bottom also. I'm going to scale this up. And then, okay, very simple stuff. Some of these work a bit more advanced. You could really play with them and see what they do. Another one that's kind of neat, maybe I can use this. I'm just going to duplicate this and scoot it over. If I take a plane like this, and I scoot that over, and I make it bigger, and I rotate it, there we go. I'm going to go to Deform, and there's one called Shrink Wrap, right there. On the bottom here, it'll tell you what to select in what order. I always forget because they're all different. So it says select the object, then the target to shrink wrap them on. Select the object, and then the target to shrink wrap it on. I think that's the right order. Okay, so now that's on there. No, it isn't. Why didn't that go? There it is. I just have to move this maybe closer. No? Oh yeah, there it goes. So you can see as it gets closer to this, how it's kind of like wrapping itself around that pole. And then if I come over here and play with the settings, let's target smooth level. Let's see, fall off. It's too much fall off. Or too much smooth level. Close if interaction, reverse bidirectional. They've changed the settings a little bit since last offset. Yeah, but that's what that one does. It's pretty cool. Oh, there it goes, bounding box center. There, so now it's like stuck to it. And as I move this, you'll see that that moves with it also, which could be nice if you obviously needed something like that. The dope sheet we know about. We manipulate the time of keyframes in there. Set driven is a way to control an animation. So let's say here I have a cube. As I move this cube down, I want this to squash. Okay, that's what I want to happen. I could go through and set keyframes. I could obviously set a key here, go to this squash, set a key on that, scoot up a little bit, squash this down, move that down, set another key, make sure I set my key on squash. There we go. And then that works, but you'll see there's a little bit, it's off, so then I have to go ahead and tweak it, and that can be a big pain, especially if I want this to be a lot more interactive. That's not. So I'm going to undo. Keep going. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to control the translate Y here. I'm going to go to Edit, Set Driven Key. And this is going to be a driver. Again, we'll get more into this when we do our actual rigging stuff, but just so you can see it. And the squash will be my driven. Okay. So I'm going to set a set driven key here. Then I'm going to set this down. Oops, I'm going to set this down. Let's say there. Then go to this and squash it to there. And then set another key. Now, as I grab this and move it, you'll see how that's moving with it. Now, it's still off, but I can go in the graph editor now and tweak how that relationship is set up. And then once I have this, I'm animating just the cube moving up and down, and then the squash is really taking care of itself, okay? A lot of times you'll use set driven when you rig things because it's just a lot easier to do it that way. The house, the Game of Thrones house, all of that was done using set driven. Exaggeration we'll talk about in a little bit. Forward kinematics, it's a way to animate something by rotating from the top down. So thinking of like your arm, rigging, yes, skeleton, joint. That's a huge forearm. Let's fix that. There we go. Okay. So if we're dealing with forward kinematics, we start at the top. So this would be the shoulder, and we would rotate the shoulder into position. Then we want the forearm to move, so we grab the forearm, and we get that in position. Okay? We would never move these because it would distort it. Doesn't work. So we start at the top, and we work our way down, go here, and go there. That's forward kinematics, starting at the top and working your way down. Skipping down to inverse kinematics, which is right here, we work the other way. We start at the bottom and work our way up. Now, if I did this and I started rotating this, then come back up, that's not very intuitive. So there's actually a tool for this called an IK handle, an inverse kinematics handle. And when I grab this, I can just grab it and move that wherever I want it. So if my character is going to pick up something, I can move the hand to pick it up and then bring it back. So they pick up something off the table, and then they can set it down here. It's much simpler as far as animating to use this for an arm for this kind of operation. If I wanted my character to swing his arms, though, this is a much easier way to do that, just rotating that shoulder joint. Okay? So sometimes when you animate a character or an item, you'll use forward kinematics. Sometimes you'll use inverse kinematics. Just know the difference, obviously. We're there. A flipbook is a book of papers that subtly change images on each sheet. You've probably seen flipbooks before. There's flipbooks, right? So every page is a different image.
I've been getting a lot of requests to make a flipbook start with something super simple. I'm just going to draw a stick. This is my custom light pad, which I designed specifically for flipbook making. All these things are part of my questions. Please leave them below, and I'll do my best to answer. And if you thought this video was helpful.
There you go. It's a flipbook. So these are nice little tools, especially if you're trying to time something out and figure out what an animation is going to look like. Even your bouncing ball, you could animate a little flipbook and do that. If you're interested in it, I have a whole box of little flipbook things that you could actually like practice on if you want. We'll go over that in a bit. Frame rate is the amount of frames per second. So our frame rate is 30 frames per second. Okay, that's typically what we should be rendering our stuff out at. The graph editor, we know we can adjust the time values and the value values. Let's go over those right now. Set a keyframe here, and I'll go up and set another keyframe, and go up, set another keyframe. Okay. So a hold frame is a keyframe which holds the value of an attribute for a given amount of time. So in this case, I may not want this to go like up and then come straight back down. I may want this to go up, hold for a time, and then come back down. So if I go up here, and then I set this where I want it, and then set a key, that's what the hold value would do. Now in here you can see they're obviously not the same value, so if I just copied this and pasted that, now I have a hold. It comes up, holds, and then goes back down. Okay, that's a hold frame. In between is just a transition between keyframes. That's what this is. Joints and bones, that's what I was using over, I deleted it. There it is. These are joints, these are bones. Okay, this is what you would use when you're rigging something more complex than some basic stuff, right? Bouncing a ball, no big deal. A house, no big deal. If I'm doing a full-blown character, I want to generate bones and joints because it makes it easier to create pieces of geometry that will move inside it. And the way it works is I would have the bone or the joint there. pretend that those are the actual pieces of geometry. I would take this, shift-click that, parent it, take this, shift-click that, parent it. I would add my IK handle. And now when I move this, you'll see that those two pieces of geometry are going to move right along with those joints. Okay? Now these are just parented. I could do what's called skinning, which is actually going to wrap the geometry around those joints. So if I delete these, and I make a cylinder, scoot that over. This is a demo version of an arm, by the way. And smooth. There you go. You'll believe that's an arm. Okay. So I'm going to take that, and I'm going to go to skin and bind this. There we go. So now if I grab this and move it, now you can see that this item, ignore that, will flex with it. Now, Maya does come with some cool stuff that's included in it under the content browser. These are things that they're just starting points. So some of these are like animals. I'm going to go to the bipeds, and I'm just going to grab this guy here. Whatever. So there's a character. Typically they put them in there so you can practice with animation and rigging and stuff, but they also include it so you can practice with mudbox and sculpting. Under the rigging one, yes, under skeleton, they have a quick rig. And what this allows you to do is basically take a character who's set up a biped and hit auto rig, and it'll go through and it'll figure out how to rig this character. And it only works with that kind of shape. It doesn't work with like a dog or a cat or a four-legged creature or someone with like one leg or 7 arms. Okay, so here you can see all the joints and bones that are inside there. Here's a wrist control. So now I can grab this and move his hand around. I can grab this and move his elbow around. I can grab this and move his upper body around. Same thing here, and same thing there. Oops, and whoops, come on. There we go. Cool stuff. Okay, so joints and bones will be used throughout anytime you're doing anything character. Even if you're doing something automotive or something mechanical, lots of moving parts and gears and stuff, typically I'll use joints for that as well. They're really nice ways to do that. If you have something with a lot of pivot points you're trying to animate, that's really where it comes in handy. Keyframes are basic building blocks of animation. We know what that is. Make sure I have a battery. A linear keyframe is, whoops, create polygon, cube. I'm going to set a key here, go up, set a key. There we go. So linear just means it's going to go straight. There's no interpolation. It's going to evenly distribute each one of those amounts on that thing. This is flat, so it tries to do an ease in and ease out of every single keyframe. That can be good or bad, depending on what you're doing. If you have a lot of keyframes, you may really see the ease in and ease out of each keyframe. So if I do this, every time it goes to a new pose, oh, it's just way too fast. Slow it down. You'll see how it's slowing down before each one. I may want to make them spline, which is that one. And this one will try to keep a nice flow to each one of those. So it won't slow down for each keyframe. It'll just kind of fly right through them. Okay, it's subtle, but you really would see it when you have something more concrete. Line of action is an invisible line that's drawn through the character's body. You've seen this before in figure class. Basically, the first thing you would draw before you draw a character is that line of action that goes like down their center line. So stuff like this. You can see that line of action of how they're moving. Whoops. Motion capture. So using high-tech software, you can actually record people's motion. Stuff like this.
My name is Marcus. David and the creators have painted a really intriguing and engaging picture of a near future where we rely upon androids for a lot of our service class. The class that serves us, that helps us.
So instead of them going through and actually like animating each character, they record all the motion using those suits, put that into the computer, and then the characters in the computer would do that. Typically, if you look around here, you see this, this, this. Every single one of those is a camera. This system, I'm assuming, is probably a 24 camera system is what it looks like. That's probably $1 million setup right there with all those cameras around there. That room is dedicated to that. Once these cameras are lined up, once these guys are in position, forget it. You don't want to have to touch any of that stuff. It's super accurate though, because all of the cameras are there and they're all working together. As the character moves around and they turn, it's recording every motion of the trackers that are on the suit. If I scoot over here, you can see these things. Those are all little signals that the cameras are picking up, and the cameras are following each one of these things, so that when the arm moves up, the trackers that are on the arm are being followed by all the cameras, and they can figure out exactly what they're doing. Now the technology for this is always evolving. This is a like $1 million system. People can't have that all the time. So there's other ways that you can do that. One of the cheap ways you can do it is using an Xbox.
For the past few months, I've really been wanting...
I don't know if that's what he's doing at all. iClone, sure. There it is. So this is using just a regular Xbox Connect, and it's definitely not as accurate as the $1 million system, but for a lot of things it can get you part of the way there at least. Okay, especially for if you're an independent studio or you're just kind of yourself working out of your house. There's a lot of stuff you can do. If you're unfamiliar with it, the Xbox Connect, which is a depth camera, it can actually record distance from the camera, and it can figure out things that are moving. Like what, as you move your arm up, it recognizes your arm because of the depth of it. Yeah, you can see it's definitely not accurate. But you can tie it to animations, and then a lot of times with stuff like this, it's a starting point to get you closer to that next stage. And some of these are actually like real time, like as he's moving in here in the camera, the character is moving out there. Some of them, some of the better ones, have to process it first, and then they'll figure it out. No, those are all the iClone characters. And then it really came about with Lord of the Rings. Andy Serkis, when he did Gollum, that was kind of like the revolutionary thing where motion capture became like a, yes, let's do this all the time. And Andy Serkis is the guy who did the motion capture for Gollum. His performance in the first Lord of the Rings was so good, they actually like reworked Gollum into the story a lot more than they planned on. And they actually like rebuilt him. If you look at Gollum from Lord of the Rings 1, it's only a silhouette. But if you look at him from that one and the future ones, he looks a little bit different. And Andy's role obviously changed based on the first ones to the later ones. And now he's actually an actor in movies, and he's done Planet of the Apes. So they got a couple things going on. He's wearing the suit, so you can see the little transmitters there. He also has a facial motion capture system on. and that facial motion capture system is recording his facial movements that would then apply to the animal. Sometimes the animators will use that as like a starting point. Sometimes they'll use it as reference. It all depends on what kind of feedback or what kind of data they're getting out of it. Yeah, there's so much stuff with motion capture now, it's like insane of what they're doing. Some of these are motion capture suits. So sometimes they have these just motion capture suits where they don't require any special cameras or any special suits. I don't see anything right away. There's Andy Serkis. But they're always trying to find, obviously, better, quicker, faster ways to do that. Motion capture gloves. Cool. All right, so that's what that is. Even After Effects has a motion capture feature built into it where you can actually rig a character. It'll use your webcam to read your facial movements, and it'll animate a character based on that. So more stuff to play with. We'll get to these constraints in a minute. Physics is just the way objects move realistically around the world. In Maya and in other software, let's delete that cube. Let's create a new one. And all my stuff is turned off. If you ever find something missing, go to the plugin manager and you'll load it right here. There we go. So I'm going to make this an active body. And what that's going to do is it's going to fall when I hit play. Super slow.
12 minutes from
Now this is real time, or not real time, but real scale, so that block is huge. There we go. Yeah. No, it's a human. This is actual scale. And then I can take the human here, and let's see. We'll make him a passive rigid body. All right, fine. Mesh. All right, doesn't like that, so I will just create something else. I'll make a cube right on top of his head, like so. And that will be my collision object. There we go. Now, he is strong. So this is physics inside the software. It's not an actual, like, right now we're not getting like realistic results because we don't have a realistic scene kind of set up and realistic things happening. Our job as animators is to emulate physics. So when we have something moving like the stick, we want to feel like there's actual properties and things happening. But we also want to exaggerate it and make it look more appealing. These dynamic things that are in the software are great, but the problem is that we can't rely on them because once they're in there, they're kind of locked. We can't play with them any further. Play blast we talked about before. We want to load all of our frames into the memory, play it back. Point constraint will go over, pose to pose will go over. Poses are represent how the character is positioned. So when we do the stick, same thing. He's in one side, he's in the other side, kind of like blocking. Skinning is where I took that solid piece of geometry and attached it to the joints so that it was like flexible and moved around. Slow in, slow out, solid drawing will do, spline we did, squash and stretch will do, staging will do. Stop motion you've seen before. Stop motion. It's basically frame by frame by frame animation. Sometimes it's with clay, sometimes it's with Legos. It doesn't matter. It could be with really anything. So that's stop motion. And if you want to see a time lapse of stop motion and see how like crazy it is, yeah, there you go. So basically every frame they move it and take a picture. Every frame they move it and take a picture. Move it and take a picture. For some of the claymation stuff that they've been doing, they've actually been working with a lot of 3D stuff where they would actually build 3D models, what they're supposed to look like at every frame, and then they would 3D print those and then paint them and then use those in the actual thing. And then obviously you see some green screens there, but they're going to remove all that stuff afterwards. If you've never tried it before, it's definitely something to do to see how much patience it takes to be able to do any kind of animation like this.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a second you spent for the last 4 hours. Straight ahead action we will talk about. The timeline is where we obviously put our keyframes. Timing we'll talk about. Twinning we'll talk about. Zoetrope is a cool thing. This is like one of the earliest forms of animation. And it's like they would have pictures on the inside of these drums, and they would spin the drums, and if you look at it through these slats here, you would see the animation happening. So hopefully they'll show it, otherwise why have a video? I know, I guess. Yeah, there it goes. So now looking through the slats, you see it looks like the horses are running. Amazing, right? Technology. All right, that's that one. Okay, so now let's go over the constraints so we can see what those are. I like to bunch these together because they work similarly together, so it makes sense. So here's a sphere. Oops. So under this constrain menu, these are all different ways that we can constrain stuff so that they're kind of like locked together. There we go. Okay. So the first constraint is a parent constraint. So let's say that I wanted to take this item and I wanted it to be parented to this or connected to that so that when I move this one, that one will move with it. So if I just grab these two, this one first and then that one, and hit P, that will parent it, meaning that I can grab the big one, the second one I selected, and move it around. Sometimes you may want to have it connected at one frame and not another. This doesn't allow me to do that. This is basically locked forever to this. So I'm going to click on this one, shift click that one, the opposite order, and then hit parent. So now when I click this and move it, you'll see that that moves with it. Okay? Now here's where the advantage of that comes in is, let's say that I wanted plane. This sphere is going to drop off this cube. Okay? So I'm going to animate the sphere. It's going to go over here. Oops, let's do a little hold keyframe there. And we'll come back. Okay. So whoop, this comes in, drops off the cube, and goes away. Okay, it didn't drop off the cube yet. I'm going to go right here, and then I'm going to parent constrain this to the table. And now I'm going to swap between them. I have two different things here, two different parent constraints. One is for the sphere, one is for the plane. So right here, I'm just going to set a keyframe. I'm going to go up a frame, and then swap these. All right, so now if we watch, he drops it off. Okay? So if you have a character picking something up and then setting it down somewhere, this is how you would do that. You would have a parent constraint picking it up so that it moves with the character. Then you have another parent constraint for it setting it down. You might have a character that has a weapon, so his hands might be constrained to the weapon so that the weapon moves his hands or vice versa. Okay? Again, more stuff that we'll get into. We have a point constraint and an orient constraint. A point constraint will constrain the position of an item. An orient constraint will constrain the rotation of an item. The parent constraint is basically, it overrules both of those. Okay? They used to just have these two. They combined them and made a parent one. Okay? So as long as you know that point is only translates and orient is only rotates, and parent is both, you're in good shape. Okay. Scale is exactly that. It conforms to the scale of an item. So if I have another item here, and I have another item here, and I scale constrain them, whenever I scale one, the other one will scale with it. Okay? If I move it, it doesn't move. If I rotate it, it doesn't rotate. But if I scale it, they're connected. Okay? Let's create a cone. There we go. And I'm going to put the pivot for this at the bottom because it makes it look cooler. Okay. All right. So the next one is aim constraint. And what this is going to do is it's going to aim an item wherever it's looking, wherever I tell it to look. So I'm going to say, hey, this is the item I want you to look at. So you cone aim at that. Okay. Now initially it doesn't know which direction is its aiming direction, so it just kind of goes with the default. I'm going to go in there and tell it that I want the Y to be the aiming direction. So now when I grab this and move it, you can see how that is just aimed right at it. And the same thing here, as I move this, it's aimed right at it. So when we do something like eyes, it's very easy just to make a target that the eyes will then follow around, versus grabbing the actual eyeballs and having to rotate them to try to guess what we want to look at. Pole vector constraint, we don't need to worry about that yet. And then there's a couple other ones, geometry, normal, and tangent. And again, these are for animation, but you can also use some for modeling. So I'm going to take another cone here, and I'm going to click this, shift click that, and do a geometry constraint. So now that cone is like stuck to the geometry. So it won't get off of there at all. I can also grab this and say a normal constraint. And again, I'll go into the options and change which way is the aiming. And so now as I move it, you can see how it's like stuck to that. Okay, and then there's a tangent one. We don't use tangent too often. Basically, it makes sure that it's like tangent to it. We don't use it that often. All right, cool. So that's those ones. And then the last ones that are in the group